Okay, hi, I'm Denver Holt from the Owl Research Institute in Charlotte, Montana, and I'm here today to hopefully answer a few questions for you regarding our cameras. This is the fifth year, I think, now we've worked with Explore on cameras, and it'll be our second year with the Osprey, our fifth year with the Great Horned Owls, and our first year with the Great Gray Owls. The Long-eared Owls did not nest in the area that we preferred this year, and so consequently we don't have a long-eared owl cam up and running. We're still hoping that they move into the area where they nested in the same general vicinity for 4 years in a row. So that's it. I guess everybody's fairly excited about the Great Gray, and I don't know how many Great Gray cams there are up in the world, but this is probably one of the few. And one of the things we have, which is kind of neat that many don't, is infrared, so you can watch them at night. So I guess Matt's going to tell me what to do next here, and that was the intro. We're live? Okay.
Okay. Looking back at older snapshots, some eggs don't seem to hatch. What does the owl do with those eggs?
The question was older snapshots of, I don't know, of some of the birds that we've been monitoring, but some eggs don't hatch, I guess, is the question. What do the owls do with them? It just depends, sometimes they just leave them and neglect them. I don't believe I've seen them eat eggs that haven't hatched. Certainly we see them eat eggshells after they've hatched, as we did with the Great Gray yesterday. But very often, I have most of my experience comes with snowy owls on that one, and they tend to just leave these eggs for reasons I don't know. It's kind of interesting. We open them up, and some of them are developing, and some of them haven't developed at all. But maybe they know something we don't know about that. But the ones that I see in snowy owl nests, they don't eat.
What are the stages of feathers for the great horned owl chicks? And are they the same as the great gray?
What are the stages of feathers for the great horned owl chicks, and are they the same for the great gray? I guess I can give you the basics on that. When the owls hatch out, they hatch out in a white down. Some people call the prototile or the neotile, but it's the first down. And then they gradually, over let's say a week or 10 days or so, they start to molt into a second down, which some people call the mesotile down. And that tends to be more of the camouflage down. So in that sense, it's pretty basic among species. And then as far as everything else goes, yeah, it's pretty much the same thing. The number of the primaries, the secondaries, the coverts, the tail feathers. A little variation from small owls to larger owls in the number and the molt pattern and all that. But it's basically the same, I would say.
And besides color differences in great grays and great horns, are there other differences in the feathers?
Are there other differences in the feathers besides color differences? Uh, it's hard to say. I think if you look at something like the great horn and the great gray, where hearing is really important, in hunting, what you'll see is these modifications or structural modifications on the feathers, if that's where you're going with this, where you look at the leading edge of the feather and the barbs are well developed on the leading edge of the feather on both of those species. And if you look at the surface area, the barbules, it gives it that kind of felty or velvety texture, both very, very well developed. And then the trailing edge of each feather has a fringe on it. And that's probably what most people believe is leading to a somewhat silent flight for those species where hearing is really important. Now, the great horned owl may use hearing and vision, and I don't know which one is more important. And the great gray owl also may use hearing and vision. I don't know which one is more important. But if you take those structural adaptations, you look at the facial disc of a great gray owl and the asymmetrical ear positionings, and hearing is probably pretty important. And if we shift over to something like a snowy owl, just has reduced numbers and coverage of those structural adaptations, doesn't have a well-defined facial disc, has symmetrical ears, vision might be a little more important. But it doesn't mean it's exclusive. They probably use a combination of both. Hopefully that got to the question.
And how are great grays able to hear so well?
How are they able to hear so well? Well, I guess it's the same with a lot of species. What we tend to do is extrapolate quite a bit from some laboratory stuff, particularly in the barn owls where they've done a lot of this work. And I guess essentially what they do is they've got asymmetrical ear positionings here, and they have a well-defined facial disc. So what you want to do is you want to get the sound source in front of that facial disc. It's almost like a satellite dish. And by having a asymmetrical positioning, the left is maybe higher than the right, and the border on the right is higher than the left. By having that, you can pinpoint the sound source. But the sound source has to cover what they call white noise, which is just high and low frequencies. Most activity by small mammals, for example, will create that white noise. So you're an owl hunting close to the ground, which is another prerequisite for using hearing, and you hear that sound source. You turn your head, you kind of get the sound source in between the ears, and then you can locate on the vertical and the horizontal plane almost simultaneously where those two axes cross, and you can capture essentially the sound source. In the case of a great gray owl, it's been known to be able to plunge dive or hear sounds below, let's say a foot of snow or so, and crash to that and capture a small mammal. The boreal owl is one of the classic examples, one of the owls that's been studied in captivity that is able to do that. And in that species, the right ear is higher than the left, and it's even evolved on the skull.
How many times a day do the chicks get fed? And does the female or mom pull off smaller pieces of meat for them?
All right, how many times a day does the chick get fed? You know what? Right now we're just learning about the great grays here, so I can't tell you. But one of the neat things about using the cameras is we're going to be able to look at that. Is how many times the male brings prey in? Is it mostly at night? Is it mostly during the daytime? So feeding rates will be kind of neat to see with the ability of these cameras. As far as the feeding goes, as with most species of owls, what we know the information. Yeah, the female, when the chicks are really small like they are right now, the female will take prey and she'll rip little bits and pieces of it off and feed it to the chicks. As the chicks grow, however, let's say they start pushing a couple weeks of age, they'll be able to swallow larger chunks down, then eventually maybe whole mice. It could be 50 grams or so, 40 grams, an ounce and a half, maybe even up to 2 ounces.
Do you know of instances where a chick is fledged and returned to the nest for more than a few hours?
Not sure. I'm not sure I understand that. The chick has left the nest and come back. With the great grays, I'm not sure, to be honest with you. But we'll be able to look at things like that. But certainly, from time to time, even after any of these owl species disperse from the nest, they may occasionally come back to a nest, whether it's in a tree or on the tundra mounds. They may occasionally come there for reasons unknown, but generally they're gone for good.
And let's see, what would you say be the major behavioral differences between great grays and great horns?
Major behavioral differences between the great horn and the great gray. It's hard to say. The great grays are maybe a little bit more of a forest bird, forest edge bird, more restricted to that type of habitat. And that would be habitat selection. The great horns are very diverse. They can be in forests. They can be out in the countryside behind me here. Yeah, it's hard to say the behavioral differences. I would say that the great gray might be more of a food specialist, concentrating a little bit more on small mammals, but capable of eating things the size of grouse and maybe young snowshoe hares, whereas a great horn might be more of a food generalist. When prey species are scarce, let's say small mammals, for example, which they both feed on, then they're able to diversify more to larger prey, and they could probably eat things like muskrats and pheasants and grouse and things of that sort. So they can diversify their diet a little bit more. Both can hunt both day and night, so that's probably very similar. Both use a combination again of hearing and vision to locate prey. Nest sites. Let's see. Yeah, it's probably very similar, although you don't see great horns that often in big broken top stick nests, even though it does happen, or broken top stumps. But for the most part, it seems pretty similar.
I've noticed that these great gray owls make some very different sounds. Their sounds are also very quiet for their size. Is that usual, or are they trying to be quiet so to not call attention to their nest? And do most owl species sound very different from each other?
Okay, well, there was a bunch there in that question. It had to do with vocalizations. The great grays call. What happens is during the advertising period or during the courtship period, whether it's the great horn, the great gray, the pygmy owl, etc., the calls, or the primary calls that you hear, the hooting and the tooting, tend to be very loud, projected very loudly, and the birds often are in perches where they're able to, distribute the vocalizations over further distances. And when nesting begins, they go into what we call a quiet period, and or what our friend Steve Hyro calls a soft talk period. So they still can use similar vocalizations, but it is a lot quieter. Whether or not it's quieted down so they don't advertise where the nest is, it's hard to say. Something the size of a great horned owl or great gray owl is probably very capable of defending its nest, where something maybe the size of a solid owl or a pygmy owl might have a little more difficulty defending its nest against predators. So there's still a lot of vocalizations going on. You can hear the female hooting pretty regularly, and you can hear the male in the background hooting with the deeper voice and a little bit of faster cadence. You can also hear all these other very subtle vocalizations that the female makes at the nest. Don't know if they all mean, but if you listen closely now, you can start to hear some of the little grunting that's going on here. I don't know what that means. But there's a lot of vocalizations. One thing to remember about owls in general is they have a real diverse vocal repertoire, but it's the primary calls that we're used to, the hooting and the tooting, or the great horn, or the great gray, or the saw-whet owl. So, but once nesting comes, these things tend to settle down, and they go into a more quiet, soft talk period.
Does the female ever leave the nest, and is the male the sole provider of meals right now?
Okay, so the question was, does the female ever leave the nest? I'm just going to answer for both the great gray and the great horned. Yeah, well, she's got to go off, go to the bathroom. Maybe she stretches. Maybe she casts a pellet. Maybe occasionally, the chicks get older, she'll hunt right from the nest. We see that in several species. But primarily, what happens is that we know the females lay the eggs. And in owls, and it's different in different species, and birds of prey, it varies a little bit. But in owls, as far as we know, for most species, there's about 250 species in the world. Don't have data on a lot of them, but on a small percentage. Is that only the females incubate, only the females brood the chicks, and generally speaking, only the females feed the small chicks in the nest. So the male's job is to go out and hunt and participate in nest defense, which can be species specific. Females will often participate in nest defense, but it also depends on the species as well. So I hope that got to the question there.
Are great gray owls usually nocturnal?
A great gray owl is usually nocturnal. Well, I'm learning a lot more about great gray owls than I had known before. I've been chasing around for a long time, and I've found a number of nests over my career. But now that we're able to watch them by camera, I'm learning that there's a lot more activity going on at night than I normally had thought. And I've been doing a little reading into the literature before this talk here, and finding that other people have also noticed that, it depends, but there's a lot more nocturnal activity than we normally think. I think we often think of great gray owls in the wintertime sitting on fence posts or moving down into these wintering areas, and they're out hunting during the daytime. And we kind of get that impression that they're kind of a diurnal hunter, but it appears that they can do both. And it may depend, too, on food resources. Now, if this nest hatches all 4 chicks, as we know they have 4 eggs, then there's going to be a lot of mouths to feed, and that may influence activity periods as well.
So with 3 to 4 chicks to feed, will it be survival of the aggressor?
With 3 or 4 chicks in the nest, will it be survival of the aggressor? That remains to be seen now that we're able to watch them on camera. I know some of the older literature and the old wives' tales used to indicate that the larger siblings would beat up and maybe even kill the smaller siblings in competition for food, as perhaps we saw in those osprey last year, where the bigger sibs beat up on the little sib. But in watching snowy owls that I've worked on now for 25 years from blinds and on camera, we just don't see that overt aggression in the chicks, and we actually see partitioning of food by the females. That's not to say that larger chicks might not outcompete the smaller chicks if food is scarce in the nest, and then they might starve. But I'm not so sure we're going to see overt aggression. But I'm learning as you are in this one here, because we have the ability now to watch them on the cameras both day and night. And that's really a neat part of this whole Explore project, is being able to look at behavior, which is something we don't do much anymore of in wildlife research.
What determines the number of eggs laid?
What determines the number of eggs laid? I would say, the overall answer to that is just the amount of food. We know in some species, like snowy owls, for example, or short-eared owls or long-eared owls, when there's abundant food, they can lay really large clutches of, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 eggs or more. And that's the same with the great gray. We're seeing 4 eggs here, and that would indicate to me that there's probably a good food source around. Whereas in low vole years, for example, or low lemon years, they would lay far fewer. So food seems to be the determining factor. There's probably some influence as far as age of adults as well.
Has this pair nested in this area before? And do great gray owls mate for life?
Okay, has this pair nested in this area before? The answer is yes. And do great gray owls pair for life? Some of the literature, and I had to read some of this before I got on here, indicates that the pairs, if they're alive and they may stay within the same region and stay together for periods of time. Now, whether they divorce, which certainly occurs in some species, or whether one of the mates dies, then certainly they'll take up another mate. But for at least some periods of time, there's some indication they will stay together for periods of time. But for life, it's hard to say.
Is the great gray population declining or stable? And if declining, is this mostly due to habitat loss?
Is the great gray population declining or stable? I don't think anybody knows the answer to that. Certainly when you go into areas and log the whole thing and you cut down all the trees, particularly big mature trees that have, a component of big old dead snags that broke off that great grays like to nest on, or even mistletoe, but mature forests. Certainly when you do that, you take away some habitat. Whether the population is declining or not, no one really knows. And there's just not enough, I would say, organized good surveys that cover many years in order to make that determination. There's certainly been a lot of good research on great grays, and there's certainly concern about it. There was studies in Oregon. There's been some good studies in Oregon, California, and Manitoba, indicating that forestry practices could affect them locally. I'm not sure about the long-term and overall populations.
Where are the long-eared owls this year? Do
We're
they have
the,
plans to relocate the camera?
all right, we're the long-ears this year. We're still waiting. We've had 4 years in a row the long-ears have nested right in there. And last year was spectacular with the 7 chicks. Every year that we've had a camera on an owl nest, every year they've been successful. One of the things that's happened here in western Montana this year is we've had a really severe winter. We've had extended cold and we had snow covering the ground almost the entire winter. The ponds right around the porch here in the house, we've lost almost all the fish, which is why the osprey might be having a tough time behind me. Uh, we have found dead bodies when we're doing our nest searches this year of long-eared, short-eared, barn owls, great horned owls along the roadside. It's been a really, really difficult winter. And I think the birds of prey, but I'll stick with the owls, in general have had a difficult time finding food. Great gray perhaps being the exception there in a different area. So I think starvation was a major problem for a lot of things. And this area that we've had the long-eared owl nest this year has been a great area for years. And there was very few birds there this winter, and right now they're not nesting. Will we relocate it? We've got another nest located right now, but you can't even see into it. So we're holding out hope that they might come back to this nest, or we may just move it.
And what is the approximate number of these owls in the United States and in the world?
The approximate number of great gray owls in the United States and the world, or all the owls? No idea. You can go to these sites which will give you population estimates of, the world's birds, and you can have it from a world perspective, a North American perspective, a U.S. perspective, or even a state or regional perspective. Except for a few species, perhaps something like the spotted owl, which is very, very well studied and limited in its distribution. You might get close, but as far as the other species go, I don't think you have any idea whatsoever. The Ferruginous pygmy owl, yeah, we may know the relative numbers down in the southwestern United States, but it also has an enormous distribution to the south of Mexico and into Central America. So they're best guesses, and we just don't know. We haven't devised a method I think is reliable as far as estimating populations.
Are great gray owls migratory? And if so, where do they go?
Are great gray owls migratory, and if so, where do they go? I think that's probably several answers to that. Clearly you can see in some areas, particularly in the Great Lakes region, where birds, come out of nowhere in big numbers sometimes in severe winters, and they'll show up in large numbers in kind of specific geographic areas, certainly indicating a migration or some nomadic movement. And nomadism is a form of migration. Here in the western mountain regions, I can't say that we see anything that would indicate a big migration, but what we see is an elevational shift where sometimes great gray owls in the wintertime will show up at the lower elevations, and then during the breeding season, they'll move back into the forest or back into the upper elevations. So I think you have a mix there where you might have, something that may be somewhat migratory slash nomadic in certain areas and in certain conditions, such as high snow, lack of food, or lack of the ability to get food, even though it may be there. And then you may just see a normal elevational migration in some of these mountain regions, such as where I live here.
Has it been determined that these are the same ospreys from last season, or is this a different couple?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. I mean, if you were just to say the female sure squawks a lot, you might say it's the same one. And there's been a little discussion I've read on the comments where some people think it's the same pair and others do not. Unfortunately, we haven't banded them, and we didn't take feathers for any DNA. One of the things you could do is, record those vocalizations from last year, if Explorer still has them, put them on a sonogram or a spectrogram, and then record this year and see if they match up. But certainly for the female, because she's quite vocal, and then the male. But they're not marked. Whether the same birds or not, I don't know. Ospreys certainly do show fidelity to a site and very often fidelity to a mate, although separation does occur and dispersal in other areas does occur. Nonetheless, they were pretty much on time this year. This year they were, I think, a couple days earlier than last year, and everything seems to be on schedule. They laid, I think, the first week of May last year. Seems to be a very, very long courtship. You would think if they knew each other that maybe they would get it going a little bit earlier here, but it seems to be right on schedule, but I don't know if it's the same individuals.
How can I attract owls to my yard?
How can you attract owls to your yard? If you learn to hoot and toot, you can sit on your porch and call them in. Well, one of the things, it depends where you live. A lot of people put up nest boxes, and nest boxes are fun. They're fun. Personally, I put one up for my niece years ago, and we got a screech owl in the backyard just, within the first year. We put a series of nest boxes up for the smaller species of owls, which we don't really have a high percentage of the boxes being used, although we check them really it's actually a very low percentage. But you could put up boxes, something, would be suggested would be something like a wood duck box, and that can attract screech owls or solid owls. And they seem to do pretty well in some areas. And again, nest boxes are kind of a fun thing to do, especially personally. Some people have put up platforms for species such as great gray owls, where they've gone into forests where logging practices may have taken down, potential nest trees, and they put a platform up similar to an osprey, but just attached to the side of a tree, and that seems to have worked in a number of areas. And again, I think some of the people have done it in Oregon and then in Manitoba, and I'm sure there's other areas as well, particularly over in Europe where there's a lot of forestry practices and heavy forest management.
Let's see. How long do owls live?
How long do owls live? Tough to say. You can look at the Birds of North America accounts, and they'll have what they call longevity records. Now, what does that mean? It means that a certain individual may live a long time, but on average, what about all the individuals? So, something like a great gray owl, great horned owl, it wouldn't surprise me to have 20 plus years in the literature on that. Now, whether that is the average or is unlikely. That's just what you get every once in a while. Most species probably don't live all that long. I hate to say that. And then the smaller species, probably don't live as long as the larger species. But certainly this information indicates that some of the smaller species can live 10 or 12 years or more. So depends on the species. The larger ones generally living longer than the smaller ones. There was a recapture this year in Massachusetts of a snowy owl. I think it was 26 years or something like that. And then there was one in Canada a couple years ago that was 20 or so years. So some indication that certain individuals can live a long time.
How long does it take for a chick to fledge?
It's getting cold. In what species? It's probably, these chicks are in their nest, just particularly the larger species like the great horns and the great grays. They have a long developmental period because they're such a large species. And so you're probably in the nest 4 to 5 weeks. And even more, 4 to 5 to 6 weeks before you make your first flights. And so you'll see these great grays and the great horns, I don't know if they don't really pump their wings quite like ospreys, but they're certainly exercising. The first thing that they'll do is they'll branch. This is before they can fly. They'll climb on the branches around the nest, or maybe in the case of the great gray, they might try to climb up the side walls of the snag. But you're probably talking, 5 weeks or more before they fledge and have any kind of sustained flight.
Do owls prefer a certain kind of tree to nest in?
Do owls prefer a certain type of tree to nest in? Some species do, and that's some of the things that we're working on. Now, if we just look at this great gray right now, and we look at that snag, one of the things that we want to do is to, identify all the natural sites that great gray owls use. And so, yeah, we could go around and we could put up platforms, but is that really going to, provide us the information to tell forest managers that great gray owls might need a component of big snags, the size of the ones we have here, so we'll measure it later. They also might need a different type of forest with, types of mistletoe and things of that sort. So it does depend on the species, and it can be very, very important. But they would also use a hawk nest, a raven nest, an accipiter nest, a clump of branches that could hold an egg. In the case of saw-whet owls, let's go back to the nest box stuff. And there's a lot of nest box studies on these small cavity nesting owls, and I think that's great and all that. But one of the things that it's not doing is we're not identifying, the natural snags that they need. So right now we have somewhere over 50 natural saw-whet owl nests that we've identified, and we've been able to take the measurement data so we know who made the hole, whether it was a natural hole in a tree, whether it was excavated by a woodpecker, the species of tree, live or dead, certain measurement data on the trees. And we hope to publish that, and that should be of use for resource managers that might say, okay, we need to, during our forestry practices, maintain these types of trees for secondary cavity nesters, such as owls. There's other species that need, snags in this case as well. And another thing we look at, if we look at the saw-whet owls, we look at the pygmy owls, and we take the measurement data, there's distinct differences between the trees. So just leaving a nice tree in the woods for a saw-whet owl or a boreal owl, a big hole, doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be good for a pygmy owl. And the other thing too is, in these nest box studies, they tend to be put up with, I won't say there's not really a plan in mind, because if you're trying to mimic the natural distribution of natural trees that are rotted and or provide holes, that's a difficult thing to get at. And so the nest box studies, although they're kind of fun and all that, and we have nest box studies on boreals and saw-whets as well, they just don't provide the information we need for forest managers in that sense to maintain natural nest sites.
Why is the mom feeding one chick and not the other?
Why is a mom feeding one chick and not the other? Which one? I don't know. I can't tell you the answer to that. And maybe that chick's getting there first, but maybe she detects something we don't know. I don't know the answer to that. But we'll see. Hopefully they'll all grow and equalize at the same.
It's kind of a repeat question, but what's the lifespan of these owls? Great grays or great horn?
What's the lifespan of these owls, gray horn, gray? It's probably, again, the longevity records are probably, could push 15, 20 years or more. I don't know what the average lifespan is, and I don't think there's enough data to say that, as far as banded birds that were hatched as nestlings or in their first year of life and then recaptured over time. Because you don't get the information doesn't mean they're not alive and they've just dispersed somewhere else.
Why are these owls so hard to spot when they're in trees?
Why are the owls so hard to spot when they're in trees? Well, there's a variety of things, and if we look at our evolutionary adaptations talk that we do on owls, Matt and I, one of the things we say is, first of all, they're active by night, so they're trying to hide by day. For the most part, active by night and or low light levels. So in the course of evolution, they've evolved these cryptic colors in this patterning, which render them, difficult to see. So first of all, if they're going to be roosting by day, trying to get some sleep, they're going to pick inconspicuous locations. Then, just through the course of evolution, they've evolved these colors and these patterns, and whether it's gray or if it's brownish or if it's straw colored, but these colors that are difficult to detect, the natural colors in that sense there. And then the patterning that they have also helps reduce, detectability by, someone like ourselves. And then the behaviors, add a little behavior into that as they kind of sit back. And if you get a little too close, most of the time you walk by, you get a little too close, they might compress their body plumage. If they have tufts, they might raise their tufts. They might change the facial circle, the circular disc. They may raise the white eyebrows or the bristles here and give you kind of a two-dimensional approach. And then they just watch and let the threat walk on by. So, yeah, they're hard to do. But if you know how to survey for them and you set up a good survey protocol, you can go to areas and you can at least hear them from time to time, and you say, okay, we've repeated this area 3 times, it keeps calling for this area. Then you can go in and start looking for them, so you can narrow an area down. Then you might look for pellets or whitewash and get lucky enough to find the owl, maybe a nest too.
Okay. Here in Alaska, we've spotted a few owls in the last several weeks. Are they already nesting here also, or did they start later?
All right, here in Alaska, hello Alaska, I got to go up there next month to work on snowy owls. I don't know what species you're talking about. So, what was the question? One more time.
Are they already nesting in Alaska, or do they start later?
Oh yeah, they're already nesting in Alaska. It probably just depends on the species. Whether we're in May, they've got to be setting up, right now, if not nesting. And I don't know where you are in Alaska. The snowy owls are probably going to be laying up in the very northern part of Alaska, the North Slope, in the middle of May. So the other species, the forest species, are probably, it's right on the verge, I'm sure, if not some already nesting. Alaska's a big state.
How many different types of owls are there?
How many different types of owls? Right now, we recognize about 250 species in the world. I saw one list where someone recognized 248, and another where they recognized 249. And this changes all the time. It just seems to always be changing. Now with the advent of molecular techniques, the species list has grown quite a bit. I think back in, when I did one of the first lists, I was looking at the literature, and we only recognized about 130 or 140 species, 50, 60 years ago, and now we're up to about 250 species. One of the things that's kind of neat that some of the people who have done this work is, in owls, if it sounds different, it's generally a different species. So they don't learn their song or acquire the song by listening to others and then have this own individual song. They tend to all sound alike with a little bit of difference in cadence and number of notes. So if an owl sounds different, it's a different species. And so the molecular data has now backed that up. And the guys in the 40s and 50s seem to suggest that vocalizations were really important in determining species, and the molecular data seems to back that up right now. So about 250 species in the world.
Can owls see color?
Can owls see color? There's been a lot of work on the tawny owl in laboratory situations. And some of the work indicates that, they might be able to see shades of color, but for all practical purposes, if you're out at night, light gives us color, and when you lose light, you lose color. So for all practical purposes, it's probably of limited value. But yet, only a few species have been tested. That's the same thing with hearing. Only a few species have been tested. So if we have 250 species in the world and only a handful have been tested, it's hard to say what maybe other species have evolved to do.
Which of the owls do you think are the best parents?
Which are the best parents? They're all great parents. Although you can, I'll take that back a little bit here. On the snowy owls, which, we're able to watch because it's 24 hours of light. They nest on the ground. We have blinds. We have cameras. We've been able to watch them for 25 years. And they seem to be, in my opinion, great parents. However, you do have what I would call bum males. They're just not very good. They don't provide good resources. They don't protect the nest that well. So they don't produce that many young. So I think quality varies among them. But in what I've watched, in general, yeah, they seem to be good parents. Males have their duties, females have their duties, and they come together for the breeding season to raise a family. I think that's a great idea.
How many chicks are in the great gray owl nest right now?
How many chicks? I think the second one hatched this morning. First one yesterday, second one this morning. And Catherine, for Explorer, she's very keen on watching the cameras. She might, correct me here, but I think it was yesterday and today. So one day apart, and the two have hatched right now. I think we have two.
What's your favorite owl?
What's my favorite owl? Hard to say. 250 species in the world, some pretty cool looking owls. I've worked on long-eared owls for 30 years, snowy owls for 25 years, boreals, great grays, pygmies, etc. So many species for 20 plus years. Gosh, they all have such great qualities. There is something about, white animals that is just so appealing. And the snowy owl among owls is one of the most admired of all owls. I admire it as well. Hard to say, but I do like it. My cat's gonna join me, I think, right here. As a matter of fact, she just joined me. Her name is Noma. All right, Noma is the species name for the northern pygmy owl, Glossodium noma, which means small or diminutive. When we rescued this cat here, she was a tiny little thing here, and we named her Noma. All right, girl, take off now. She doesn't want to leave.
How long have you been working with owls?
How long have I been working with owls? Oh gosh, my entire life it seems like. One of the differences I think that we have is that we work on owls full time. The wind's coming up, so I'm adjusting stuff. We work on them year round. Every week we're doing some aspect working on owls. I mean, we certainly have office work to do, but we pride ourselves on long-term field studies. And as I say, 30, 25, 20 plus years on many, many, many species. Yeah, so I've been working on owls, I would say, definitely since the late 70s, early 80s. But, as an adult professional, it takes a long time to kind of, I don't know, maybe get into that, know what you're doing class. So yeah, I don't know, since the late 70s, early 80s, I think I'm finally starting to learn a little bit. And each year you get better, your questions get better, you find new ways to do stuff, you learn a ton. So, I got a long way to go still.
What other animals do you love?
What other animals do I love? I like all animals. My little cat there, who I never thought I'd be a cat person. Well, we work on small mammals. I don't know about loving, but we work on small mammals as well. So we know a lot about lemmings. We've been, monitoring lemmings and snowy owls for 25 years, and voles, and so a lot of small mammals. But when Matt and I don't do research, we guide natural history tours all around the world. So we guide for the biggest nature tour company in the world, Victory Manley Nature Tours, and the small one we have in Montana, Wild Planet. So we take people, we do private tours to see all kinds of wildlife and talk about just adaptations of various species in general. How do large mammals and birds survive the winter in Yellowstone of our tours? We take people whale watching. So yeah, we like a lot of animals. I'm not sure love is a word for me, but we certainly admire all species.
One chick lags behind and doesn't fight for its food. The mom ignores him. Is that just how it goes? Fight for your food or die?
Okay, if one chick lags behind, doesn't fight for her food, is that how it goes? Fight or die. I have to go back to the snowy owl because that's where we have the most experience. We're able to watch them because of using blinds and being in the daytime. And I think scurrying for food sometimes there's that part of the competition, but we're not seeing that fighting, that people have talked about. We're not seeing the big chicks beating up on the little chicks, or mom not interfering. I mean, there are times when we see the female, we'll watch and she'll portion prey what seems to be somewhat equally to all the chicks in the nest. And we have noticed, and if you watch that PBS documentary that was on our study, or even they didn't tell anybody, but it was on our study site, you'll see the female go care for a sick one. So we're not seeing that, fight or die. But what we might see is the male or the female come to the nest with prey, and the chicks run to get to the prey, and whoever gets there first gets it. But we're not seeing the fighting part.
Why do owls eat the eggshells?
Why do owls eat the eggshells? I don't know if I know the answer to that. And it would just be speculation. I mean, do they need to replenish calcium in their body? They use a lot of calcium. What is it? CaCO3 or something like that. Calcium carbonate from the medullary bone in egg production, perhaps, among other things. Is that the answer? I don't know. Is it to maybe reduce the smell of an egg for potential predators? I don't know. I don't know the answer, but they don't always eat them. Sometimes they eat them, sometimes they just get trampled in the nest. So I don't know the answer.
How many broods does a great gray have in one season?
How many broods does a great gray have in one season? Only one, as far as I know. You think about that. It's a long incubation period. So you have a courtship period, which who knows how long it'll be. I think we're learning more and more that these courtship periods take far more time than we thought in a lot of these species, particularly these resident species. So let's say you got a courtship period of a month and it starts in February or March, and you have an incubation period of a month, and so maybe you have 4 eggs or 5 eggs or 2 eggs, and you have an incubation period of about a month. Then you have a brood rearing period, and the chicks are going to be in the nest for, depending on the species, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 6 weeks, and then they're still dependent on the adults. And that takes you well into summer and maybe even into fall. We know for sure great horned owls are still trying to bum food from their parents well into October, November. We hear it out here even. Right off my porch, you can hear the young trying to bum food from their parents. So, most of the species, you only have, one opportunity to breed per year. There's been some indication of double brooding in some species, some of the smaller species, but I'd like to see more evidence and also more findings of that, in order to confirm how often it may or may not occur.
How long does mom stay with the chicks?
How long does mom stay with the chicks? Again, that's kind of species dependent. If we go back to the long-ears that we were talking about last year, and that aren't there this year, what we have learned with the long-eared owls is that, again, by parental care, female incubates broods, males provide food, females will hang out near the nest, the chicks get a little older. And then when the chicks seem to get in that 10 or 12 weeks of age, the females up and disappear, never to be seen again. And the males will stay with them for another few weeks, and they up and disappear, and you're on your own. So you see that, and then you can go back to the great horns I just talked about, where the resident pair tends to be here throughout the year, and the chicks stay and follow the adults around and stay together as long as they can and bum as much food as they can, and then they disperse after that, looking for their own territories.
How large of animals can they prey on?
How large animals can they prey on? Again, it's species dependent. Let's go to the pygmy owl, for example. We have a really cool study going on pygmy owls, northern pygmy owls, for 20 plus years. And I think gram for gram, or if you want to say ounces, but gram for gram, the pygmy owl is one of the baddest things out there. And it can kill things. Let's say it weighs, let's just say 50 grams, just 50, 60 grams. All right, so let's say 2 ounces. It can kill things half its body weight, sometimes its body weight, and sometimes even greater than its body weight. So think of that. Think that you have to go kill something that weighs the same as you, kill it, and then eat it. That's pretty tough. Now you look at something like a great horned or a great gray owl. Great horned, certainly they can kill things the size of skunks, but I don't think they do that often because I think the skunks wreck them with the spray, the butyl captain. But they can kill muskrats, they could kill pheasants, they could kill rabbits, size of snowshoe hare, cottontails. Then great gray owl, even though it may feed on small mammals primarily, certainly capable of killing something the size of young snowshoe hares and maybe grouse. And we can look at something the size of a snowy owl, and it can kill glaucous gulls, eider ducks, Arctic fox, usually in defense of its nest, only rarely. And then some of the eagle owls of Europe, in Siberia in particular, are known maybe occasionally to take small deer or something of that size. The Blackenstein's fish owl of Japan occasionally might be able to take a very small deer, and I don't know how they kill them. But anyway, so it just kind of depends on the species.
How is it the chicks don't choke when eating such large prey?
How is it the chicks don't choke? I don't know. It looks miserable, You gulping that thing down. There's some really cool footage we have on one of the documentaries we did on snowy owls, and you can watch those chicks just gulp down is what appears to be an enormous lemming. Just I have no idea. The foot sticking out, the tail sticking out. Looks like they've got to be choking, but they get it done. And I don't know. Maybe the esophagus expands enough to slide it on down, but it looks uncomfortable, as it does when it comes back out as a pellet.
How do people end up with pet owls?
How do people end up with pet owls? I don't know. They take them from nests. I think there was an article I read not too long ago about something going on in Kenya maybe, but that was eating owl eggs or something like that. It was a cool article, but I forgot most of it now. But yeah, I think they just steal them and sell them. There's these owl cafes now that I've heard about where they get these owls, and I can't remember where they are in some other country here, but they get these owls and you put them in cages. You can go sit and have coffee and look at the owl or something like that. But it's probably illegal.
Do owls see better at night or during the day?
Do owls see better at night or during the day? They see perfectly well during the day. They're just adapted to see well at night because of the rod-cone ratio, where the rods help, bring in more light so they can bring more light in to project a brighter image on their retina. But certainly, if you've never seen an owl fly by day, if you worked with us and you watch them fly down through the twigs in the forest, you could see that they certainly can navigate and see well by day.
These owls make flapping sounds when they fly?
Do they make flapping sounds when they fly? Sometimes you can hear them, but for the most part it's muffled. As I said earlier, the structural adaptations on the feathers and the wing in general, what it does is suppresses any kind of noise that might be created by flight, aerodynamic flight noise. So if you think about a goose or a duck flying over and you hear that whistling sound, it's because they don't have those structural adaptations which suppress the noise created by flying. So, and those species that hunt, primarily by day, like the snowy owl, they still have those structural adaptations, but they're not as well developed as in something like that hunts by night, and we're hearing important as in a great horned owl or a great gray owl. I don't know. I think sometimes it seems like we can hear a pygmy owl fly by, but that's it. But it's not complete silence, but it does help reduce it. And some of the data indicates some people say they can only hear 2 or 3 times better than us, up to 10 times better than us. So anyway, they've reduced it down to the ultrasonic level in some species, but yet some small mammals can hear in that range and may be able to avoid predation by owls.
Are the shells of eggs hard or leathery?
Are the eggshells hard or leathery? They tend to be hard, not leathery like in reptilians such as a turtle egg.
Will you be studying the snowy owl again this year in Barrow, Alaska?
Will I be studying the snowy owl again in Barrow? Yeah, this will be my 26th year. If I can find housing. It's getting so difficult to find housing. We're struggling right now. So if you own a house here, let me know. Yeah, heading up to the 26th year of lemmings and snowy owls this year. And I don't know how long we can keep it going. There's a young snowy owl researcher out of Canada now works for Hawk Mountain, I believe, and he's going to come visit us, a French guy, and maybe I'll be turning the reins over to him, working with him, but him taking the lead is I got a lot of writing to do.
Where does the male stay during the day, while nesting?
Where does the male stay during the day? It depends what you're talking about. Now, with the great gray, we have found him several times up there, and he's generally within about 30 yards of the nest, roosting in the, let's say the lower third of the trees, thick canopy, a couple feet away from the bowl of the tree on the branch. Great horned owl is very similar. They could be, within 50 yards of the nest. Most of the males that we work with roost fairly close to the nest because they might want to be there for protection or who knows what other reasons. But most of the males of the species we work with roost pretty close. Even the snowy owls in the vast tundra are generally within sight of the nest. There's been some indication some of the smaller species, the radio chummy, like a boreal or saw owl, may roost far away from the nest hole. I'd like to see more data on that, but nonetheless, there's some data to indicate that.
How do owls defend themselves? What do they do when they get attacked?
How do they defend themselves? What do they do when they get attacked? They've got talons, and so they'll just fight back with their claws if they get attacked. I don't think something the size of a snowy owl, the size of a great horned great gray, very few species of birds will attack. It tends to be something of a similar size or perhaps the same species for reasons I don't know why they're attacked, or maybe something like an eagle could attack them. But clearly they would use their talons to fend off an attack. Young owls in the nest that aren't capable quite yet of having the physical properties to attack, may rock back and forth and extend their wings, giving this threat display, try to like scare you off. Hey, I'm big, I'm bad, leave me alone. But if you get too close to them, they'll flip back over and lash out with their talons.
How often does the female lay eggs?
How often does she lay eggs? I gotta think about that for a second. So once the breeding season starts, I assume here. So once an egg is fertilized and develops, it depends on the species. It could be every other day, every 3 days. Maybe it just depends on the species. So I don't know the answer to all of that. I know with the snowy owls we've seen every other day, or 5-day intervals in between, 3 days intervals in between. And so it's just a matter of doing it. But again, going back to the cameras, now we have the ability to see some of this and see if we can figure out these laying intervals once the breeding season starts.
What are the biggest predators to chicks, and do they commonly get eaten?
Biggest predators to chicks, and they commonly get eaten. With the larger species, not much. Last year we had what we believed, and we inferred this, so you have to take it with a grain of salt. We had a great gray nest, and it looked like a black bear may have hitched up the tree and got the eggs. So who knows? We weren't there to see it happen, but this is what appeared to have happened. Snowy owls that nest on the ground. You've got polar bears, you've got wolves, grizzly bears, wolverines, but they could get a chick, but the adults are pretty aggressive. Something like the pygmy owls, they nest in such small holes, we don't think much gets in there, but perhaps a flying squirrel or red squirrels could get into some of the cavity nesting owls and eat their eggs or chicks. Something like a long-eared owl, raccoons have climbed the nest, and they didn't necessarily eat the chicks, but they chew them up and kill them. It doesn't happen that often, so not much gets them.
The size of the nest appears to be shrinking as the chicks grow. Will the nest size make it difficult for her to feed her chicks in the next few weeks?
Oh, yeah, you must be talking about the great horned owls. The size of the nest seems to be shrinking. As the chicks grow, it's certainly the nest is looking smaller and smaller all the time. We have another nest just right across the way here that's only 8 feet off the ground, and it's in an old magpie nest, and it's got 3 really big great horned owl chicks, and they're falling off the nest. And actually, their activity breaks the edges of the branches and makes the nest smaller. So now the female's roosting on the branches next to the nest. So, they're just going to have to walk around very gingerly and hold on. I watched them the other night, and the wind was blowing pretty strong, and they were hunkered down, just holding on. But as they get bigger, the female will probably roost on branches and off the nest, except in bad weather, and then the chicks will crawl under there. So, it does make things difficult, but, they chose the nest.
I feel so bad that owls will attack eagle nests at night. I understand it is the nature, but we have seen eagles killed due to owl attacks. Can you please help me understand the dynamics of these two beautiful birds and why this happens?
Okay, the question is, you're puzzled over why the owls will sometimes grab the eagle chicks at night, and what about these dynamics? And I think last year was something on the internet of an eagle flying by and grabbing an osprey out of a nest. You know what? They're predators. The others are food. I don't think they look at each other like, hey, dude, we're cool. We're both top of the food chain predators. You're an eagle, I'm an owl. Life is cool. I think that it's just a food source, and they do it. I'm sure the eagles occasionally might get an owl or in turn get something else. So I can't tell you why it is. It probably doesn't happen that often. If you were really to look at a large sample of the food habits, the percentage of times that an eagle chick ends up in a great horned owl die is probably very small. But when it's captured on film, it's pretty dramatic, and you might think it happens all the time. But it doesn't.
Let's see. How long before chicks can thermoregulate?
How long before chicks can thermoregulate? That certainly is dependent on the species. And there's been some work on a fair number of owl species, and it seems to be that, some of it broken down in the percentage of in 100% thing. It can thermoregulate 25%, 50%, 75% during certain days. But probably by the time they're, week to 2 weeks or so old is when they start to thermoregulate on their own. And then when they accomplish the feed to 100% degree, I'm not sure of that. But there is some literature on a variety of species indicating that. Certainly by the time they're leaving the nest. But, when they first born, they're totally dependent on the female for food protection and thermoregulation.
I've read that great horned owls skip a year of breeding about every 3 years. Do most owl species do this?
The question was, the great horned owls skip a year of breeding every third year. Do most owl species do that? I don't know the answer to that question. I don't even know if it's true in great horned owls. If I just look at, I've lived here many, many, many years, and the horned owls breed every single year. And so, I don't know. Is it the same ones? I can't tell you 100% it's the same ones, but they breed right here every single year. In all the areas that we work, the horned owls are breeding every year. We know 20 nests right now that are occupied this year and they'll be occupied next year. Whether it's the same individuals or not, I don't know that, but it's likely some are the same individuals. So I don't know the answer to that question.
How often do owls die from disease?
How often do they die from disease? Again, don't know that. Certainly it occurs, and you'd have to look into each species in order to determine that. Now, something like a great horned owl, you might be able to get a lot more information because they're relatively common and easy to find. Something like a pygmy saw-white boreal, much more difficult. But certainly there are diseases that all these species incur.
What happens to a chick if it dies? Does the mom eat it or feed it to other siblings?
All right, so if a chick dies, what happens? And that is probably, I would say, an individual behavior. We have seen in both snowies and short-eared owl nests, occasionally long ears, but a chick will die, and sometimes it's just left there and cast to the side. Other times, the female might swallow it down, and then at other times, she may feed it to the other chicks. So it probably depends on a lot of circumstances, such as food resources, but it also may depend on individual behavior. Reasons for it, again, are all speculation.
Are great gray owls endangered or close to becoming endangered?
Are great gray owls endangered or close to becoming endangered? I would say no one really knows that. I think there's concerns down in Yosemite for the great gray owls down there. It's kind of this disjunct, population down there, and so you might want to talk to the people down in Yosemite, California. But I would say right now in a place like Montana, the West, the boreal forests of Canada, Alaska, great gray owls are probably doing well. But you might have some regional things going on in relation to forest management practices.
If a chick falls out of a nest, can a parent put it back in?
If a chick falls out of a nest, can a parent put it back in? In my experience, no. I've never seen that. I think that I've heard of someone saying that it was carried back to the nest by the parent. I've never seen it, and I don't know the truth about that. But what we've learned over the years, if they're reasonable size, if they're a little, week old, they fall in the nest, no, they're not going, they're going to die. But if it's pretty big, like those great horned owls maybe that you're watching now, if they fall out of the nest and if they fall 60 feet, they might, die. But if they don't, then they're very capable of climbing up into branches, and innately they'll climb up something, and then they'll sit there and they'll scream for food, and the adults will continue to feed them. Now, will they bring them back up 60 feet? I doubt it. But innately, what they'll do is they'll get to higher ground, and they'll use like sticks or twigs. They'll grab with their feet and pull with their bill in order to get up above ground, and then they'll scream for food at night.
I have an owl in my area with an unusual call. Is it likely that it will continue to have an odd call, or do young owls develop their calls over time?
You have an owl with an odd call. Don't know what it is. If you could imitate it, maybe we could figure it out. I don't know, honestly. If I heard it, we have owls here that scream. You got to remember, too, that owls have a really diverse vocal repertoire. There's all kinds of calls going on and songs out there. We call songs the typical whoo, whoo, whoo of the great horn. But that also can be given in different contexts and have multiple meanings, which we don't understand. But I don't know the call you're hearing. Certainly there's some people suggest that in great horned owls, for example, that the hooting as they develop, the hooting isn't very good, when they first develop it, and then into their first year it develops into the normal hooting. So I don't know what's going on in your situation. Sorry.
Read that great grays can get up to 10 pounds. Is that true? And is the average closer to 2 or 3 pounds?
Okay, yeah, you read the great grays can get up to 10 pounds. I don't think there's an owl in the world that gets up to 10 pounds that I know of. You know, there is the black and singed fish owl of Japan and Southeast Russia that arguably is the largest owl in the world, maybe in competition with the Eurasian eagle owl of Siberia, the northern subspecies. But I don't think that they push 10 pounds. I think you're probably talking again 2 to 3 pounds, 4 pounds for the heavier ones. You know, the female snowy owls can push 4 or 5 pounds. So the great gray is probably in that 2 and 3 pound class.
Will you be banning the great gray owl chicks?
Will we be banning? Yes, we will be banning the great gray owl chicks. But we won't do it on camera. Even though it's kind of harmless, it doesn't look that harmless. So we try to keep that, away.
Question regarding the ospreys.
Okay,
could the big competition about the nest be a reason for the delay in egg laying? There were many different ospreys and quite ambitious Canada geese around.
Okay, could the question was the delay in breeding in the ospreys, could that have been the competition for nests and or the Canada geese? The Canada geese are terrible in my mind. They're out there. We try to shoo them off and this and that, but once the ospreys get back, then they can do a pretty good job, as you saw in one of the clips, of pushing the geese off. But the geese are tough, and a lot of times they won't budge, so I help it along, to be honest with you. We just don't want them there. We'll put something up there. We'll just shoo them off, or we'll work there. As far as the competition with the other ospreys, yeah, there was one day that there were 4 ospreys. I don't know if they were fighting over the nest. I mean, there was a lot of fighting going on. What it was all about, hard to say, but it sure looked like it was over the nest. One of them had a band on it, but I did notice that male who arrived first, now, and the female came in the second day, if it's the same pair. Now, she was gone, and he was around, and that other, what I would say, female with the band on her leg came in, and that male drove her off, so he didn't care about her. He seemed to be loyal to his mate, I guess, at this point in time. Now, did that delay nesting? I don't know. It was only like 2 or 3 days of that activity. Right now, I would say nesting seems to be on. I was looking at the data from last year, the notes, and they arrived about the same time. Last year, the female arrived a couple days after the male. This year, I think it was 1 day after the male. But they laid the first week of May, and Yesterday, I think I made a note that the female was looking a little nesty, and she was hunkering down in there in like the incubation posture. So maybe something's going on. I think one of the problems is, which might be delaying it, if it is delayed, is that we had such a severe winter that almost all the fish, the ponds all around the house here, almost all the fish died. We had a hard freeze. We had a lot of ice. We had snow on top of it. And what the general talk around the neighborhood is that everyone's fish died, and we feel that they just all suffocated for the most part. There's still a few around. I saw a tern get one the other day. But so that might delay it, but I think the competition with the others, I don't think has much of an effect because it was just so short-lived. But we still have this week to see if she lays.
This great gray owl almost looks turquoise at points. Is that just the light, or is there any true color?
Yeah, it almost looks turquoise. That could be a dietary thing. They could be eating, one of those little blue gems, turquoise. No, I don't know. It might just be the lighting. She's definitely a gray with mottled white in there, and the same as the male.
Do owls keep to themselves other than their mates, or do owls ever run into their siblings, parents as adults? And if so, are they able to recognize each other?
Yeah, do owls usually keep to themselves except to their mates, or do they ever run into each other, know each other? I don't know the answer to the question to that. For example, a family group goes away, and then years later it's encountered again. One of the adults encounters the sibs. I don't know if they recognize each other, so I really can't tell you that. There is a few records. I think the black and singed fish owl is one good record of a male breeding with his daughter. And for many, many years now, they've been together. But that's a population that has a limited number of individuals. As far as keeping to themselves, species like the great gray and the great horn may roost apart, during the non-breeding season. but still in the same areas. There are species that come together and roost communally, like the long-ear, the short-ear, the African grass owl. Um, Maybe a little more indication these days with barn owls and snowy owls that there is some communal roosting going on, but that tends to be species that are open country species, highly nomadic or highly migratory, depending on fluctuating food resources. And groups of 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 may occur together in those species. Hope that kind of got to what you were asking.
How large are the territories for the great gray owl and the great horned owl?
How large are the territories? I read that earlier. I can't even remember what the heck it was, to be honest with you. And it undoubtedly probably varies a bit with food resources and in studies in geographic areas. So the territory of a great gray in Montana may be different. There's people working in Wyoming right now, Brian Bedrosian and his group. They've got some really cool information. He presented at a talk on some of these movements with radio tagged owls, and I just can't recite it right now. I totally spaced it out. But our great horned owls here seem to be set at about a mile or less. If we plot the nest in GPS, we can find a nest there, just a 3/4 to a mile apart in all these tree groves here. Snowy owls, it seems to be that. But the territory size, I'm just talking about nest locations. I forgot.
Is Noma a threat to the birds around there, or vice versa?
Is Noma, for those of you who hadn't known earlier, my cat named after the pygmy owl, Glossidium noma, the northern pygmy owl. Is she a threat to the birds around here? She's trained only to kill invasive species, and so she only kills house sparrows and starlings when she's out and about. No, I think she's kind of scared of everything. The geese chase her around, the ducks chase her around, the pheasants chase her around. She's very, very tiny. Although she's formidable, she does kill weasels from time to time. I try to keep an eye on her, but she is an indoor cat, and a happy one at that. And in the barn, she's really good at keeping the mouse populations down, which is where we live here. Everybody wants a couple barn cats.
And our birds,
Sorry.
And our birds a threat to Noma?
And a bird's a threat to Noma. The geese are. She's terrified of the geese. And the osprey, they don't even pay her much attention to her. The horned owls, people say their cats disappear for the horned owls. I've seen no conclusive evidence of that, but it may occur from time to time, especially smaller kittens.
Last question. How do I get a job like yours?
How do you get a job like mine? And Matt's, who's reading me the questions, who works for us, and others that have. I think you got to be a buck the system type of person. I looked at the traditional ways and homes of wildlife research, and just personal. Didn't want to end up in an office working for either the state of the feds or a university system. And I said, I want to be in the field and study animals year round. And started the Owl Institute. Took a chance. More guts and brains, I'm sure. It's worked out really well. So both Matt and I and others who work with us and have for us, we get to do research full-time, long-term studies, and we also serve as natural history guides. So we get to go around the world many places and take people to see wildlife. So I think that's the future. So if you're looking at your future, private wildlife research institutes are starting to pop up everywhere. And there's a lot of species out there, and all these traditional homes of research can't cover them all. So start your own group and raise your own money, and you can have a kind of cool lifestyle if you like this. All right. Well, look, that was the last question Matt told me. So thank you very much. Hopefully we got some information to you which is useful. And keep watching the nest. And if any of you out there, you can always support our research. We need a new Suburban. We need four-wheelers. We need snowmobiles. All kinds of stuff. So until next time, thank you again.